The flying banana. Most helicopters look more or less the same. This one looks like somebody accidentally bent it in the middle. Meet the Piasecki H-21, better known as the flying banana. At first glance, it looks completely ridiculous. The entire body curves upward toward the tail, giving it the shape of an oversized banana with rotor blades attached. But that strange design wasn't for looks. Engineers needed enough space for large rotor blades at both ends without them crashing into the aircraft itself. The curved body solved the problem while also creating a surprisingly capable transport helicopter. The weirdest part is that despite looking like a flying cartoon, the flying banana served all over the world and even saw combat. Not bad for something that looked like it belonged in a fruit basket. The flying crane. Some helicopters carry cargo. This helicopter practically became the cargo. Meet the Sikorsky Sky Crane. The first time you see one, it looks unfinished. It has a cockpit, an engine, and a giant metal skeleton connecting everything together. That's because engineers removed almost everything that wasn't absolutely necessary. The goal was simple: lift ridiculously heavy loads. Instead of carrying cargo inside the aircraft, the Sky Crane carries it underneath, allowing it to transport construction equipment, vehicles, and even entire buildings. The craziest part is that it looks less like a helicopter and more like a giant flying engine. Yet decades after its introduction, machines based on the design are still working today. The flying jeep. This might be one of the most dangerous transportation ideas ever seriously considered. Meet the Hiller VZ-1. Engineers wanted to create a personal aircraft that soldiers could fly across the battlefield. Their solution was essentially a giant platform with rotor blades underneath it. That's it. The pilot simply stood on top and controlled the aircraft by shifting body weight. In theory, it was simple. In reality, asking someone to balance on a flying rotor platform while under battlefield conditions wasn't exactly ideal. The concept never caught on, but it remains one of the strangest military aircraft ever built. And somehow, things only get weirder from here. The flying egg. Some helicopters look futuristic. This one looked like a giant egg. Meet the Sud West Jin. Unlike most helicopters, it didn't use a traditional tail rotor. Instead, compressed air traveled through the rotor blades and blasted out the tips. This created rotation without the twisting forces that normally require a tail rotor. The result was an aircraft that looked unusually smooth, compact, and strangely quiet. The design actually worked surprisingly well. The problem was that it wasn't efficient enough to replace conventional helicopters. Still, few aircraft have ever looked quite this strange. The flying saucer. For a brief moment, engineers wondered if helicopters even needed to look like helicopters. The result was the Avrocar. This bizarre machine looked less like an aircraft and more like a UFO. The goal was ambitious: build a flying vehicle capable of hovering like a helicopter while also traveling at high speeds like an airplane. On paper, it sounded revolutionary. In reality, it struggled to remain stable even at relatively low altitudes. Pilots reported constant control problems, making the aircraft difficult and sometimes unpredictable to fly. The project eventually ended, but not before becoming one of the most famous flying saucer experiments ever attempted. The twin-rotor giant. Some helicopters solve problems by adding one rotor. This one solved problems by adding two. Meet the CH-47 Chinook. Its appearance is immediately recognizable thanks to the enormous rotor mounted at the front and another at the rear. At first, the design looks unusual. Then, you learn why it exists. Using two large rotors eliminates the need for a tail rotor while providing incredible lifting power. The result is one of the most successful heavy-lift helicopters ever built. The amazing part is that despite first flying in the early 1960s, Updated versions are still operating today. Sometimes weird works. The helicopter airplane. This aircraft couldn't decide what it wanted to be: a helicopter, an airplane, or both. Meet the V-22 Osprey. At takeoff, its giant rotors point upward like a helicopter. Once airborne, the entire rotor system rotates forward, transforming the aircraft into something that behaves much more like a turboprop airplane. Watching it happen feels almost wrong. The engines literally tilt while flying. The design allows it to take off vertically while achieving speeds that normal helicopters simply can't match. For years, many people doubted the concept would ever work. Today, it's one of the most recognizable aircraft on Earth. The helicopter with no tail rotor. For decades, helicopter designers accepted one simple fact: you needed a tail rotor. Then engineers at McDonnell Douglas decided to challenge that idea. The result was the NOTAR helicopter. NOTAR stands for no tail rotor. Instead of using a spinning tail rotor to counteract torque, the system pushes air through the tail boom and uses airflow to create the necessary control forces. The result is a helicopter that looks normal until you notice something missing: the giant spinning blade at the tail. It's one of those ideas that sounds impossible until you actually see it working. The giant dragonfly. If someone asked you to imagine the largest helicopter ever built, you still probably wouldn't picture this. Meet the MIL V-12, the largest helicopter ever constructed. This enormous machine used two giant rotor systems mounted on massive wings extending from each side of the aircraft. The result looked less like a helicopter and more like something from a science fiction movie. Its lifting capacity was so extreme that it still holds helicopter lifting records decades later. The craziest part is that it actually worked. The problem was that there simply wasn't enough demand for something so massive. So despite its incredible performance, only a few prototypes were built. And perhaps that's the most fascinating thing about helicopter history. Whenever engineers encountered a problem, their solution wasn't always elegant. Sometimes they built a flying banana. Sometimes they built a giant skeleton with rotor blades. Sometimes they built a flying saucer. And sometimes they built the largest helicopter the world has ever seen. Most of these designs never became the future, but they proved something important. The fastest way to discover what works is often to build something completely crazy and see what happens.